The rain always came softly in the town of San Miguel, like a gentle rhythm that matched the quiet strumming of a guitar under the flickering streetlight. Every night, as the sky turned from deep indigo to velvet black, a boy with tired eyes and calloused fingers sat on a wooden crate outside the small bakery at the corner of Lopez Street. His name was Rafael Aguilar, though few knew his last name. To most of the townspeople he was simply Rafa, the boy who sings like the rain. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't demand attention, it invited it. There was a kind of ache in his tone that made people stop mid-step, the same way you pause when you hear something too beautiful to ignore. Children would gather by the bakery window, holding pieces of leftover bread as they listened. Old men, sipping their coffee inside, would shake their heads and murmur, "That boy sings like he's lived 1,000 lives." But Rafa hadn't lived 1,000 lives, only one, a life small in the eyes of the world but full of quiet storms. By day, he worked at the fish port unloading baskets and sweeping the floor for a few pesos. By night he sang. His guitar was old and missing a string, its body scratched from years of wear, but when he played, it didn't matter. Music flowed through his hands like it was something he was born to do. Inside his small house, no bigger than a single room, his grandmother, Lola Nina, sat by the window, listening every night. Her frail fingers moved along her rosary beads as she whispered prayers for him. She was the only family Rafa had ever known. When he was little, he once asked her, "Lola, who was my father?" She had looked at him for a long time before answering, her eyes clouded with memory. "Your father's music changed the world, Anak. But your heart will change people." He didn't understand what she meant then. He only knew that when he sang, she smiled. A real smile that erased the wrinkles of a hard life. Rafa's earliest memories were of her humming while cooking rice over the fire, of her soft hands patting his hair after long days, and of the dusty old cassette player on the shelf. The label on one tape had long faded, but the voice that came from it was rich and deep, singing a song that always made Lola cry. One day, when he was 12, he asked, "Lola, what song is that?" She paused before answering, "It's called Anak. A song a father wrote for his child. It's from a man named Freddie Aguilar." There was a strange flicker in her eyes as she said that name, a hesitation, a wait, but Rafa was too young to notice. He just loved the song. It felt like someone had taken all the things he couldn't say, his loneliness, his questions, and turned them into music. As the years passed, he learned to play it by heart. Every note, every word, became part of his own story, but there was something he never told anyone, not even Lola. When he turned 15, she fell gravely ill. One night as he fed her soup by candlelight, she called his name softly. "Rafa," she whispered, "something happens to me, promise me you'll keep singing." He nodded, eyes full of tears. "I will, Lola, I promise." She smiled faintly. "There's one more thing you should know." Her hand trembled as she reached under her pillow, and pulled out a faded photograph. Creased, yellowed, and fragile. It showed a young man holding a guitar beside a woman with long hair and a gentle smile. "That man," she said, "is your father." Rafa stared at the picture. His father looked familiar in a strange, haunting way. What was his name? Her lips quivered. Freddie Aguilar. The words hit him like thunder. He had heard that name all his life on the radio, on posters, from taxi drivers singing "Anak" at the top of their lungs. Freddie Aguilar, the legend, the icon, the man who wrote songs that touched millions. And suddenly, the song "Anak" meant something else entirely. That night, Rafa sat alone outside the house with the photo in his hand, staring at the face of a man who never knew he existed. He didn't feel anger, only an empty ache, like a door had opened to a world he didn't belong to. From that moment he made a silent vow he would never tell anyone. He didn't want petty or fame. He wanted to earn every note, every clap, every tear on his own. He wanted to be known not as Freddie Aguilar's son but as Rafael, the boy who sings with heart. So he kept the secret. Every evening, when the lights of San Miguel dimmed and the bakery smell drifted through the air, he played for whoever stopped to listen. Sometimes he earned a few coins, sometimes just smiles, but that was enough. He used what little he made to buy rice and medicine for Lola. There were nights when hunger gnawed at him, when he slept with an empty stomach and calloused fingers. But each dawn, he would rise again, whispering the same words to himself, "Keep singing, Rafa. Keep going." Then, one night, while he was singing a lullaby he'd written himself, a stranger from the city happened to stop by. The man stood quietly, phone in hand, recording the young boy under the streetlight. When the song ended, the man approached and said, "Kid, you've got a gift. Have you ever thought about auditioning for Pilipinas Got Talent?" Rafa blinked in surprise. "PGT, me?" The man smiled. "Yes, you. You have something real, something people don't forget." That night, long after the man had gone, Rafa couldn't sleep. He stared at the stars through the window, heart pounding. Could he? Should he? It felt impossible. He was poor, unknown, connected, but deep down a small voice whispered, perhaps Lola's, perhaps his own, "You were born to sing, Anak." As the rain began to fall again, he picked up his guitar and strummed softly, imagining a stage, bright lights, and a crowd listening in silence. And for the first time he allowed himself to dream, not of fame or wealth, but of being heard. He didn't know it yet, but that dream would carry him farther than he'd ever imagined. Toward a stage that would change his life, heal old wounds, and reunite two hearts that had been apart for nearly 2 decades. But for now, under that quiet streetlight, he was just a boy with a secret, a song and a promise. A boy who sang not for the world, but for love. The sun rose lazily over San Miguel, spreading a soft golden light across the small town. Roosters crowed, vendors shouted, and the smell of freshly baked pandesal filled the air. For most, it was just another morning. But for Rafael Aguilar, it was supposed to be the morning that changed his life. The audition for Pilipinas Got Talent was scheduled that day in Manila, 3 hours away by bus. The city was already buzzing with stories of long lines of hopefuls clutching guitars, microphones, and dreams too big for their pockets. And somewhere among those dreams, one small voice from San Miguel was meant to be heard. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. When Rafa woke that morning, he found Lola Nina coughing violently, her frail body shaking beneath the thin blanket. Her forehead burned with fever, and her breath came in short, shallow bursts. "Lola," he cried, rushing to her side. He touched her hand. It was cold and trembling. "Hold on, Lola, I'll get the medicine." He ran to the kitchen shelf and pulled out the small jar where they kept their savings. It wasn't much, just a handful of coins and a few worn bills. He had saved them for the bus ride to Manila, for his audition. But looking at his grandmother struggling to breathe, there was no decision to make. He grabbed his jacket and dashed to the small pharmacy down the street. The pharmacist looked up as he entered, panting. "Please," Rafa said, placing the coins on the counter. "My grandmother's sick, I need fever medicine." The pharmacist counted the money and shook his head. "This isn't enough for everything, Hijo. But I'll give you what I can." Rafa nodded, tears stinging his eyes. He ran back home, crushed the medicine into warm water, and helped his grandmother drink it. She smiled weakly. "You were supposed to go today," she whispered. "Your audition." "Sheesh." He took her hand gently. "You're more important, Lola." She looked at him with eyes full of pride and sorrow. "You have your father's heart," she said softly, "always giving, even when you have nothing left to give." He wanted to tell her that he wasn't giving anything up, that there would be other auditions. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Opportunities like that didn't come twice in a lifetime. When the clock struck 9, the bus to Manila had already left the station. Outside, life went on, the laughter of children, the chatter of the marketplace, the faint hum of motorcycles passing by. But inside their small home, silence filled the air. Rafa sat by his grandmother's side, his guitar leaning against the wall. He looked at it and sighed. "Maybe music isn't meant for people like me," he whispered under his breath. But as if the universe had been listening, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Mangtonio, the baker whose shop he often sang outside. Behind him stood Aling Rosa, the laundrywoman, and a few of the neighborhood kids holding a small brown envelope. Mangtonio said, smiling kindly, "We heard about your Lola. How is she?" "She's resting," Rafa replied quietly. "The medicine's helping a bit." "That's good," Aling Rosa said. "But we also heard you missed the bus." Rafa nodded, lowering his eyes. "I couldn't leave her. And besides, I used the money for her medicine." There was a pause, and then Mangtonio stepped forward, pressing the small envelope into Rafa's hands. "Then take this," he said simply. Rafa frowned in confusion. "What's this?" "Just something from the neighborhood," Rosa said with a gentle smile. "We collected a little. It's not much, but it should cover your fare to Manila. You've been singing for us for years, for free, for joy, for love. It's time we return a little of that kindness." Rafa opened the envelope. Inside were coins, folded bills, and even a small note written in a child's handwriting. "Good luck, Kuya Rafa! Sing for all of us!" He felt his throat tighten. I can't accept this," he stammered. "You all have your own families, your own needs." But Mangtonio shook his head. "You've given us something no money can buy. You made our nights brighter. You made us feel proud of our town again. Now it's our turn to believe in you." Tears blurred Rafa's vision. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then, finally he whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "Win that audition," said one of the children, grinning. "That's how." The laughter that followed felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Rafa turned back toward his grandmother's bed. She was awake now, her eyes glistening as she watched the scene. "Go Anak," she said softly. "This is your time." "But Lola." She reached for his hand, her fingers warm and firm despite her weakness. "I'll be fine. You've spent your whole life singing for me. Now sing for the world." He wanted to protest, but the love in her eyes silenced him. He nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'll make you proud, Lola. I promise." He packed his guitar carefully, placing the photo of his father inside the case, wrapped in a cloth. Before leaving, he kissed his grandmother's forehead. As he stepped outside, the whole street seemed to be waiting. Neighbors waved, children cheered, and even the tricycle drivers honked their horns in encouragement. Someone shouted, "Bring the golden buzzer home, Rafa." He laughed through his tears, overwhelmed. The world had never felt so kind. On his way to the bus terminal, he looked out at the small town that had raised him, not with riches but with compassion. Every corner, every face, carried a memory. The man who had once given him leftover bread, the woman who mended his torn shirt, the old man who taught him to tune his guitar, they had all become part of his music. When he finally boarded the bus, the envelope of coins and bills in his pocket felt heavier than gold. He looked out the window as San Miguel faded into the distance, whispering a silent prayer of gratitude. As the bus rumbled toward Manila, he pulled out his guitar and began to hum softly, his voice trembling with emotion. Passengers turned to listen. A mother with a baby smiled. A man across the aisle closed his eyes. Even the driver turned down the radio to hear him better. And in that moment, Rafa realized something profound. Kindness travels. It echoes, like a song carried on the wind. He wasn't just bringing his own dream to Manila. He was carrying the dreams of everyone who had ever believed in him. He didn't know what waited for him on that big stage. He didn't know if he'd win or fail. But one thing was certain, he wouldn't be singing alone. Because behind every note of his song was a small town, a sick grandmother, and a community that had given him more than money. They had given him faith. And sometimes, that's all a dream really needs to begin. The city of Manila pulsed with life, horns blaring, lights flashing, and people moving in every direction like an endless current. But inside the towering studio of Pilipinas Got Talent, time seemed to slow. Hope, nerves, and dreams filled the air. Hundreds of contestants crowded backstage, each clutching an instrument, a costume, or a trembling hope. Some laughed nervously, others prayed quietly in corners. And among them sat Freddie Aguilar, clutching his weathered guitar to his chest as if it were a part of him. He had never been in a place so loud. The bright lights, the cameras, the bustle of production crews, it all felt like another world. His shoes were still dusty from the long walk from the bus station, and his shirt, carefully ironed that morning, was already wrinkled with sweat. But none of that mattered now. He was here. For years, he had sung for strangers under a streetlight. Tonight he would sing for the world. A stagehand called out, "Contestant number 382 Freddie Aguilar." His heart stuttered. That was him. He stood up slowly, gripping his guitar so tightly his knuckles turned white. As he walked toward the stage, he could hear the crowd murmuring beyond the curtains. Thousands of people, bright cameras, judges sitting under a sea of light, and among them, Simon Cowell. Rafa had watched Simon on TV for years, always admiring how honest he was, how he could see through everything but truth. But standing here, about to perform before him was something else entirely. His stomach twisted in knots. The stagehand gave him a reassuring smile. "You'll do great, kid. Just breathe." He nodded. The curtains parted, and suddenly light, blinding, beautiful, terrifying light. The stage stretched before him like a dream. The judges sat behind a gleaming table. Simon Cowell, known worldwide for his sharp words and sharper instincts, Angel Locsin, radiant and warm, Vice Ganda, smiling curiously, and Gary Valenciano, whose kind eyes seemed to shine with encouragement. Simon leaned forward. "Hello, young man. What's your name?" Rafa swallowed hard, his voice soft. "Rafael, sir." "Rafael Aguilar." Simon's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Aguilar, huh? Any relation to Freddie Aguilar, by any chance?" The question hit like lightning. Rafa froze. The audience stirred, whispering among themselves. For a second he thought about lying, saying no, pretending the name was just a coincidence. But then he remembered his grandmother's words, "Your father's music changed the world, but your heart will change people." He took a slow breath.
"Yes,"
he said quietly. "It's my father." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in. Even Simon seemed momentarily taken aback. "You're telling me," Simon said, his voice half incredulous, half intrigued, "that you're Freddie Aguilar's son?" Rafa nodded. "He doesn't know I exist." A hush fell over the theater. Simon leaned back, studying him. "That's quite a story. So what will you be singing for us tonight?" Rafa looked down at his guitar. "A song he wrote, a song that changed my life. Anak." A murmur of recognition swept through the crowd. It was a national treasure, a song every Filipino knew. But no one had ever heard it like this, sung by the son of the man who wrote it. Simon gave a small nod. "All right, Rafael, let's hear it." The stage lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Rafa took a deep breath. For a moment all he could hear was his own heartbeat. Then, gently, he strummed the first chord. The sound was soft but pure, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. His fingers trembled slightly, but as the music filled the air, something inside him steadied. He began to sing. "You were conceived while your mother was so young." His voice was tender, trembling, raw. It carried years of longing, every unanswered question, every night spent wondering if his father ever thought of him. Each lyric was a letter, a confession, a prayer. As he sang, faces in the audience softened. Tears welled in eyes. People held their breath. Halfway through the song something shifted. His voice grew stronger, filled with emotion too deep for words. It wasn't just music anymore, it was truth, it was forgiveness, and in that moment, even Simon Cowell forgot to judge. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the boy who sang like he was healing the world one note at a time. Rafa closed his eyes as the final verse came. Anak, me luha sa matamu. His voice broke, but he didn't stop. He let the tears fall freely as he played the final chord. The sound lingered in the air like a prayer answered. Silence. Then, an eruption. The audience rose to their feet, applauding wildly. Some were crying, some held their hearts. The judges stood too. Angel Loxon wiped her eyes. Vice Ganda covered his mouth, whispering, Grabe ang sakit, pero ang ganda. It hurts, but it's so beautiful. And Simon just sat there for a moment, speechless. His face, usually unreadable, was wet with tears. He finally stood up and whispered in the mic, that was pure. Absolutely pure. Rafa looked up stunned. His voice trembled. Thank you, sir. Simon shook his head. No, Rafa, thank you. You didn't just sing a song, you lived it. I've heard Anak hundreds of times, but tonight it felt like hearing it for the first time. The crowd cheered louder. Gary Valenciano added softly, your father wrote those words from pain. But you sang them with healing. That's something only love can do. Rafa smiled faintly, wiping his tears. Thank you, Po. I didn't come here to chase fame. I came here to continue his message, to remind people that no matter where we come from, we all have something beautiful to give. There was a long pause. Then Simon reached forward and pressed the golden buzzer. Confetti burst from the ceiling, the music swelled, the crowd screamed. Rafa fell to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion. The judges rushed up to hug him. Even Simon met him halfway, pulling him into a brief fatherly embrace. You've just reminded the world what music is supposed to do, Simon said quietly. It's supposed to make us feel human again. As the golden confetti fell around him, Rafa looked up into the lights, his heart pounding, his soul full. He thought of Lola Nina, probably watching from her little television in San Miguel, smiling through her tears. He thought of the people who had believed in him, the ones who had pooled their coins to send him here. And he thought of the man in the old photograph, the father he had never met. Maybe, he whispered to himself, voice trembling through the noise, he'll hear me this time. In that moment, under the glow of the stage lights and the rain of gold, Rafael Aguilar was no longer just a boy from the shadows. He was a voice of forgiveness, a bridge between generations, a song reborn. And though he didn't know it yet, somewhere far away, a man named Freddie Aguilar would soon watch that performance, tears running down his face, whispering the same word that echoed in every heart that night, Anak. The next morning the world woke up talking about one name, Rafael Aguilar. Clips of his performance flooded social media. The video, titled, Freddie Aguilar's Hidden Son Sings Anak on PGT, Golden Buzzer Moment, racked up millions of views overnight. People all over the Philippines and soon, around the world, were sharing it with captions like, I'm crying, and this is what real music sounds like. But inside a modest house in San Miguel, things were quiet. The morning sunlight filtered through thin curtains as Lola Nina sat by her old television, tears glistening in her eyes. Her grandson's face filled the screen, his eyes closed, his heart bared, confetti falling like a golden rain. She whispered softly, you did it, Anak, you did it. Then she pressed her hands together and prayed, not for fame or riches, but that somewhere, somehow, Freddie Aguilar would see the performance too. Across the city of Manila, inside a dimly lit studio lined with guitars and vinyl records, a man sat alone at a wooden desk. His once black hair now carried streaks of silver, his face lined with years of both triumph and regret. Freddie Aguilar was used to being surrounded by sound, applause, laughter, instruments tuning, crowds singing along. But lately, silence had been his only company. His manager burst into the room, holding a tablet. Freddie, you have to see this. Letter, Freddie murmured, sipping his coffee. I'm writing. No really, the manager insisted. It's your song. Someone sang Anak on Pilipinas Got Talent last night. Freddie frowned. Plenty of people sing it. Not like this, the man said softly. Please just watch. With a reluctant sigh, Freddie took the tablet. The screen lit up. A young man appeared, skin tanned from the sun, hair slightly unkempt, holding an old guitar. Then the voice came. Freddie froze. It was raw, trembling, hauntingly familiar. There was something in the tone, a tenderness that pierced through the years, a warmth that felt like home. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, his heart thudding faster with every note. Then he heard the words, my name is Rafael Aguilar, he doesn't know I exist. Freddie's hand stopped midair. The cup of coffee trembled, spilling drops onto the table. The words hit him like thunder, his lips parted, but no sound came out. He rewound the video, playing that line again and again. He doesn't know I exist. His throat tightened. He sat there, motionless, as the boy continued to sing his song. The song that had once been his apology to his own parents, his confession to the world. Now it was being sung back to him by a voice that carried his blood. When the performance ended, Freddie's eyes were wet. His hands shook as he pressed pause. he could hear his own heartbeat echoing in the silence. "Boss," the manager said softly. "Is it true?" Freddie leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I don't know. But those eyes," he swallowed hard. "They look like hers." Meanwhile, in the days that followed, Rafael's life changed overnight. News reporters stood outside his small home in San Miguel, asking questions, taking photos. "Rafael, how does it feel to be the hidden son of a legend? Have you spoken to your father? Will you two meet soon?" But Rafa stayed humble, quiet. He avoided the attention as best he could, retreating into his grandmother's care. Every time someone asked about Freddie, he would simply say, "I didn't come here to find fame. I just wanted to share love." Still, deep down, a small hope flickered inside him, that somewhere, Freddie had heard him sing. One evening, while he was sitting outside strumming his guitar, a car pulled up near their home. Out stepped a man in a black jacket and cap. Rafa squinted. "Are you Rafael Aguilar?" the man asked gently. "Yes," Rafa said warily. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "I work for your father." Rafa's breath caught. My father. He saw your performance," the man said. "He wants to meet you." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Rafa stared at the ground, the words echoing in his mind. His heart raced, his thoughts tangled. He had imagined this moment all his life, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to do. "Where?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The man handed him a note. "Tomorrow." His studio in Quezon City. Rafa took it with trembling hands. His grandmother, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go, Anak," she said softly. "Some doors open only once in a lifetime." The next afternoon, Rafa stood outside the studio, guitar slung over his shoulder, his heart hammered in his chest. The building loomed before him, old, familiar and somehow sacred. He could hear faint music drifting from inside. He stepped in. There, standing by a wall lined with gold records, was Freddie Aguilar himself. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with years of silence. Then Freddie turned slowly. His eyes met Rafa's, and in that instant everything else disappeared. The resemblance was undeniable, the same dark eyes, the same quiet intensity. "You," Freddie whispered, his voice breaking. "You're real." Rafa nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Freddie stepped closer, tears filling his eyes. "All these years, why didn't anyone tell me?" Rafa swallowed hard. "Lola said you didn't know. She wanted to protect me." Freddie's face crumpled. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. He murmured, "So many." Rafa set down his guitar and knelt beside him. "I didn't come here for answers," he said softly. "I came to say thank you." The Freddie looked up, confused. "Thank you for the song," Rafa said, smiling faintly.
"For Anak, it gave me strength.
It taught me to forgive, even the father I never met." Freddie stared at him stunned. "You forgive me?" Rafa nodded. "Yes, Papa." The word Papa broke something inside him. Freddie reached forward and pulled his son into a trembling embrace. Both men cried quietly, deeply, freely. Outside the studio, rain began to fall softly, like applause from heaven. When they finally pulled apart, Freddie said, "Sing with me." Rafa smiled through his tears. "You know what song?" Freddie chuckled, wiping his face. "Of course." He picked up his guitar, and together father and son began to play Anak. Two voices blending, not in sorrow this time but in grace. As the last note faded, Freddie whispered, "You've reminded me what that song was always meant to be, not just regret, but redemption." Rafa smiled. "Maybe that's why it had to be sung twice, once to ask forgiveness, and once to give it." Freddie nodded, his voice trembling. "The first time I sang it, it healed me as a son. The second time it healed me as a father." That night, as they sat together under the studio lights, a producer quietly recorded the duet. Within hours, it would spread across the internet. Father and son reunited through the same song that had once separated them. And somewhere in San Miguel, Lola Nina would see the video on her flickering TV screen, her hands pressed to her heart, whispering through tears, "Thank you, Lord. The song has come home." The Philippines Got Talent finale night arrived. A night that felt less like a competition and more like destiny waiting to unfold. The entire country was watching. Millions tuned in live, unaware that they were about to witness not just a performance, but the closing of a wound that had been open for decades. Backstage, Rafael Aguilar stood with his guitar, palms sweating, his heart thundering in his chest. The studio lights glowed like 1,000 tiny suns, and the murmurs of the audience beyond the curtain rose and fell like the tide. His grandmother, Lola Nina, sat in the front row, clutching a rosary and smiling through her tears. But tonight wasn't like the other nights. Tonight, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, quietly tuning his own guitar, was Freddie Aguilar, the man who had written Anak, the man who had unknowingly given the world his own son's anthem. His hands trembled slightly, though his face remained calm. For decades he had performed before kings, presidents, and millions of fans, but never like this. "Are you ready?" Freddie asked softly. Rafa looked at him, eyes glistening. "I've been ready my whole life." Freddie smiled faintly. Then let's sing not to impress them, but to thank them. Rafa finished, smiling back. When the stage manager gave the signal, they stepped out together. The camera lights flashed like lightning. Even the judges, Simon Cowell, Sophie Vergara, and Howie Mandel, leaned forward in disbelief. Simon whispered, "That's Freddie Aguilar, the legend himself." The crowd erupted in applause, some people even standing. But Freddie lifted his hand gently, signaling for silence. He stepped to the microphone and spoke, his deep, weathered voice echoing through the hall. "Good evening. Many years ago, I wrote a song for my parents, a song of regret, of a child who had lost his way. I called it Anak. But life has its own ways of teaching us lessons. Last week I discovered that I too, had a son I never knew." The audience gasped audibly. Cameras panned to Rafa, who stood humbly beside him, eyes lowered, holding his guitar close. Freddie continued, voice cracking slightly, "Tonight, for the first time we sing together, not as strangers, but as father and son." For a heartbeat the arena fell silent. Then came a slow, rising cheer, a wave of emotion that filled every corner of the studio. The music began. Freddie strummed the first, familiar chords of Anak. The melody floated through the air, soft, nostalgic, powerful. Then Rafa joined in, his voice clear and trembling, blending perfectly with his father's deep, soulful tone. "Nang isalang ka sa mundangito laking chua ang magulang mu." The audience listened in awe. Many began to cry. It wasn't just the music, it was what the music meant. Two voices, generations apart, echoing the same love and pain. Simon Cowell wiped his eye quietly, whispering, This is what music was made for." Halfway through the song the camera zoomed in on Lola Nina, her rosary clutched to her chest, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She whispered a prayer of thanks, her voice trembling, "Salamat, Dios ko nachapa din." As the father and son sang, something miraculous seemed to happen. The music filled not just the stage but every heart watching from home. People stopped whatever they were doing, families gathered around televisions, tricycle drivers parked by the roadside to watch on their phones, OFWs in distant lands streaming with tears as they whispered, "That's our song." Then came the bridge, the part of the song that carried the heaviest emotion. Freddie took a deep breath and stepped back, gesturing to Rafa. "Your turn," he said softly. Rafa nodded, his voice broke slightly as he sang, pouring his soul into every word. "At sa ayong pagtanda, balangaro ayong matatunghayan, ang ayong ina at ama." His voice cracked. But he didn't stop. The crowd fell utterly silent. Even the lights seemed to dim, as if the universe itself was listening. Freddie's eyes filled with tears. He looked at his son and, for the first time in public, began to cry. Not tears of regret, but of release. Rafa finished the verse, then turned toward his father. Their guitars found harmony, their voices intertwined in the final chorus. "Gayon a narito ka na, anak patawarin mo ako." Those weren't the song's original lyrics, but Freddie sang them anyway, trembling, spontaneous, real. Rafa looked at him, stunned. Then, smiling through tears, he responded, not with words but with music. Their voices rose together, blending into a single, soaring note that sent chills down every spine in the room. When the last chord faded, the studio was silent. No one dared to speak. Then, suddenly, Simon Cowell stood up. He was crying. "I've been judging for over 20 years, Simon said hoarsely, "and I've seen great performances, but never something like this. This wasn't a song. This was healing. It was love. It was forgiveness." The crowd exploded into applause. People shouted, "Mabuhay, bravo, core!" Confetti rained down once more, golden and shimmering, the same color as before, but this time it didn't feel like victory confetti. It felt like grace. Freddie turned to his son, cupped his face in both hands, and whispered through tears, "You are my greatest song." Rafa's voice broke as he answered, "And you are the father I finally get to sing with." The two embraced again, right there on Lev television. The audience stood, clapping, cheering, crying. Even the camera crew couldn't hold back their tears. The moment became instantly iconic. News outlets replayed it across the world. Social media flooded with clips titled, "The Song That Healed a Nation." Music critics called it, the most emotional performance in PGT history. Others said it reminded them that forgiveness was still possible. That music still had the power to mend what life had broken. Later that night, long after the cameras had stopped rolling, Freddie and Rafa sat outside the studio under a quiet Manila sky. The city lights shimmered around them, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Freddie handed Rafa his old guitar, the one he had written, Anak, on all those years ago. "It's yours now," he said softly. Rafa hesitated.
"Papa, I can't."
"You must," Freddie said gently, "because the song isn't mine anymore. It belongs to both of us now, to every father and son who lost their way and found each other again." Rafa looked down at the guitar, his reflection glinting in the polished wood. He strummed it once, the sound clear and warm, and smiled. Then he looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me back what I never had." Freddie smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "God lets us get lost, so we can learn how to sing our way home." They sat there for a while, just father and son, Two souls once separated by time and silence now bound forever by a song, and as the moon rose over the city their laughter echoed softly in the night, like music, like memory, like mercy itself.